Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Mike. This week's video is going to be about MAPS, which is an acronym or heuristic that we use to talk about writing. MAPS stands for Mode, Audience, Purpose, Situation. And it's going to be a really important aspect of this class because we're going to use it when we talk about the writing that we read for the class, and we're also going to use this as sort of the tool that we use to do peer review. So I hope you enjoy this video. So MAPS starts with an M. The M stands for mode, and mode is really the type of writing that we're talking about. And obviously, just like anything else, it's important to talk about writing in context. So we're not going to compare a piece of journalistic writing that we find in a newspaper, for instance, with a piece of fiction writing like Harry Potter. They're obviously different types of writing, and they have different characteristics and different expectations. So one of the things that I'm going to ask you to do when we sit down to look at the readings for the class and while we peer review each other's work is to think, what type of writing am I looking at? That should be the first question you ask. Is this, for example, an essay? Is this a short story? Is this a newspaper article? That way we have a point of reference, and then we can ask ourselves, well, in this type of writing, what makes this type of writing excellent? And if we can do that, then we'll always have sort of a reference point. Some people might say, for instance, in journalism, a really good piece of journalism gets to the point really quickly, does it very succinctly, explains the story and sort of starts with the most important points and whittles its way down to the least important points. Some people might look at another genre and have a different set of expectations. But no matter what we do, we need to realize that each piece of writing fits into a mode, whether it be something as personal as a journal or something as visible as, say, a magazine article. And if we can start and look and try to figure out what type of writing it is, we'll understand the sort of context that the writer is working within. I've given you the opportunity in this class to write in a bunch of different modes. The first mode is the personal essay. The second mode is the Remix project, which is a digital project where you'll take your personal essay and you'll put it into a digital or different form. The third project is an annotated bibliography, which in its own right is its own sort of mode with its own sort of conventions and expectations. And the third assignment is the research paper, where again you'll have a certain set of expectations and conventions that you'll work within. So when you sit down and you look at a piece of writing, one of the first things I want you to do is think, okay, what type of writing is this? What are other examples of this type of writing? What qualities does that type of writing typically have? And then you can actually look at the writing you're looking at and say, okay, yeah, it has this quality. It has a really strong thesis statement, so I think this is a pretty good example of an academic essay or something like that. Thanks. So the A in MAPS stands for audience, and the audience is sort of the intended readership of that piece of writing. So if we go back to this example of the newspaper and the academic journal, there are two very distinct audiences that we're talking about. For the newspaper, you've got a very general audience, so you have to keep that in mind in the sort of way that you write. You're going to need to write to the highest minded of people and to the lowest minded of people. You're going to want to, choose language that's appropriate to that audience. You're going to want to choose topics that are appropriate to that audience. On the other hand, when you talk about an academic journal, you're writing to an audience of experts. You're writing to an audience that's really engaged in this subject matter. You're writing to an audience that probably is pretty highly educated. So you can take different liberties when you write those pieces for an academic journal. So when we talk about audience, when we're doing our peer reviews, what I want you to do is consider, who's going to be reading this and what sort of expectations do they have? How can you meet those expectations? For the personal essay, for instance, I'm going to say that the audience is your peers. So I don't want you to, write in this very academic and dry tone. I want you to write in an entertaining, I want you to write in sort of a conversational, but still pretty formal tone. Because that's what the audience is probably going to enjoy most. That's probably how they're going to interact with the text the best. If we write in this really dry, esoteric, sort of intellectual tone, you may turn off your classmates. You may not, get them to page 2 where there's a really good anecdote. So I think it's really important that when we sit down, we first think, okay, what type of writing is this? What makes this type of writing excellent? But then we also have to think of who's going to be reading this and what sort of expectations do they have? What do they want out of this piece of writing? And I think if we can do that, then we're already on our way to improving the writing. The P in MAPS stands for purpose, and that's basically what are you trying to do with this piece of writing. So, for example, you may write a piece that's solely geared to inform the reader, or conversely, you may write a piece that's geared to persuade the writer to a certain vantage point, or you may be writing just to entertain. Purposes are really important because if you're writing a persuasive essay, but really all you're doing is informing and not formulating any sort of argument, you're going to be off task. You're not going to accomplish that goal. You're not going to, basically meet that purpose of that piece of writing. If you're trying to say persuade, but all you're really doing is entertaining with funny anecdotes and it's not very persuasive, then again, you're going to miss the mark. So when you sit down and you're peer reviewing someone's paper, I want you to think about, what is the purpose of this assignment or of this piece of writing? Is the writer trying to entertain me? Are they trying to persuade me? Are they trying to inform me? Are they trying to enlighten me? Are they trying to get me to buy something? What exactly are they trying to do? And then that's one of the ways that you can evaluate it. So we'll look at this and we'll look, what's the mode? Is this, what makes an excellent piece of writing in this genre? Who's the audience? Who's going to be reading? The S in MAP stands for situation, and we can really think of situation as having two facets, the situation of the writing and the situation of the writer. I like to think of the situation of the writing as something that we can really talk about in peer review, and the situation of the writer as something that we can sort of reflect on as writers ourselves. So the situation of the writing is sort of any sort of outside constraints that are working on the writing. Classic example would be, length requirement. Does this piece of writing have to reach a certain length, or can it only go to a certain length? Is there a certain citation style that has to be used? Those are examples of outside constraints on the writing. An example of the situation of the writer might be, what sort of physical environment was the writer working within? What sort of physical state of mind was the writer in? Were they tired? Were they, overzealous? These are, sort of things that only the writer can really know, and it's something that we can sort of reflect on in our own writing process. But, if there's evidence of something, say, for instance, you get a piece of writing that has a lot of spelling errors, you might think, well, a situation of the writer might have been that they had spell check off. And that would be an example of something that might fit under the category of S as situation. But taken as a whole, what I want you to understand is that each one of these elements, mode, audience, purpose, and situation, are all sort of interrelated. We can't very well talk about the mode without talking about sort of the... So just to recap, mode is the type of writing. Audience are the intended receivers of the communication. Purpose is, why is the writer writing this writing?